Hey everybody, welcome back to Tiny Man Time. Today on Square Zero we're going to talk about thinning your paint. I know, hold on to the edge of your seat there. It's pretty exciting stuff, but it is vitally important to miniature painting that your paint is the right consistency. So we're going to take a look at the tools that you're going to need, and then we're going to get into some paint thinning. So here we go. Alright everybody, let's start looking at this equipment here. I don't know if you noticed, but I got a nice black background. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is the wet palette. Now I know not all of you guys are going to have a wet palette, so this still applies if you're just using a straight up piece of paper or a plastic palette. The wet palette is just going to be here to provide some moisture for your paints so they don't dry out as quickly. I'd say probably for about 8 years I just painted off of a piece of white computer paper, and your paints just really don't last as long that way. So I suggest you get one of these. This one's made by Army Painter. You can't see the Army Painter logo because I have this this really great sticker on top of it. But for the sake of demonstration, what I'm going to do here is going to be the same on a piece of blank computer paper, a plastic palette, a wet palette. It's going to be the same no matter what you're using. But I want to look at this real quick and show you a wet palette is a tray with some water in it, and the tray holds a piece of sponge. This is a synthetic sponge, and then on top of that there's a thin sheet of palette paper, and that sheet allows water to move between the sponge and the paint, and you just put your paint right on top of this. I recommend you get one of these. There's some good videos on how to take care of them online if anyone is interested in learning how to use a wet palette. Miniac does a good video, but I can also do one if you'd like to hear it on this channel. So let's get started thinning our paints here. You're going to need paint, you're going to need water, obviously, and you're going to need a paintbrush. I don't think I really need to explain what any of these tools do, but you're going to need some water. That's what you're going to thin your paints with. And a lot of people will tell you it needs to be clean water. It doesn't need to be that clean. You can use water that you've been cleaning your brush in. It's not going to be that big of a deal. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is get whatever paint it is you're going to be painting with. For a demonstration, I'm going to use the Fang. It's a Citadel color. You want to give that a really good shake. Doesn't have to be primer rattle can levels of shaking, but you should probably give it a good shake. So I'm going to open that bad boy up, take a scoop, take a big scoop of paint out of it so we can really see what we're working with here. Now I'm going to zoom in. So this paint, I don't know if you can tell, but it's pretty thick. It holds its shape. It leaves little mounds. You can play with the consistency. That's way too thick. Yeah, you can kind of see it's got some you can see it's got some shape to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our water and we're just going to dip our brush into it, like so. We're just going to get some water on the brush, just whatever the brush is holding. And we're going to come back to our paint pile here, and we're going to mix in some water. Now this is a pretty good base coating consistency right here. It still has good pigmentation. You can't see the paper through it. But when you paint with it, it goes on nice and thin. It's very manipulable. You can manipulate it. I don't know what the word is. So if you look over here, this right here holds its shape. You can leave little dents in it. You can drag it and it leaves little valleys and peaks. But this side, there's even a bubble in it. That's how thin it is. This is nice and thin, and you can play with it. You can see right there. You can make it transparent if you put it on thin enough. This is a good consistency. Now, unfortunately, it is going to be something you have to practice, but I want to show you an example of what too thin paint looks like. So when we do that, you can see the paper underneath. That's way too thin. That has a use, which we can go over in another video. This is glaze consistency. But if you're looking to base coat a model, you want something that's a bit more like this. When we take this paint on our brush and we run it over here, you can see the coverage is just like unthinned paint. However, this paint will leave texture on your model, and this paint will dry smooth and nice and contoured to all your details. So the one thing I want you to take away from this video isn't necessarily how to get this consistency, because that is going to take practice. More than anything, that's going to take you lots and lots of practice. So don't get frustrated if it doesn't work right away. But what I want you to take away from it is that if you have to choose between over-thinned paint by mistake and paint that is this thick, always go with the paint that's too thin, because you can always put on more layers. You can always add extra layers of paint. But once you paint with this, if you leave brush strokes, that's it. It's on there. And then your recourse after that is to strip your model and try again, or just move on and take your experience into your next model, which is also a completely viable strategy. So there's not really a whole lot more that can be demonstrated here, unfortunately. This is a thing that you're going to need to learn for your paint brand, and you're going to need to learn, with your hands. You'll need to learn it by feel. You'll need to learn it by how it looks on the model. But practice, 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 and always take a thin paint over a thick paint. And really, that's all there is to it. This is something you're going to probably need to practice for a long time before you figure out exactly what your paint consistency is going to need to be. And it does vary a little bit by brands, so don't get discouraged if your paint goes on too thin or too thick. Remember that learning is a process, and sometimes it does take a little bit of time. But if you have to choose between too thick or too thin, it's always going to be better to go with too thin of a paint. I want to stress that. I want to make sure that if you take nothing else away, start thinner and work your way up until you get to the consistency that you need. You can always put on another coat of paint, but you can't always take off a thick one very easily. So I want you to get out there, start practicing, thin that paint, start working your way through your backlog, slay the gray. Hope that's not copyrighted, because I'm going to try and say it as often as possible. I like that phrase. But anyway, guys, thanks for stopping in. I hope you like this video, and look out for our next installment in the Square Zero series, where we're going to talk about base coating models. Okay, until next time, peace out, everybody.